Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Velebit podcast show. I am pleased to welcome our guest, Željko Glasnović, who is a member of the Croatian Parliament. Welcome back, Željko Glasnović. How's everything?
Well, great. Your every day above ground is a good day. My greetings to all our viewers and to you.
Thanks,
Professor.
Well, listen, we tackled on this topic of hate speech and many other facets of hate speech, and I would like to stay within the same framework of hate speech. However, there are different aspects of hate speech nowadays, and we want to, so to speak, exemplify that with some historical with examples and events. Of course, primarily here in Croatia, in ex-communist Yugoslavia, and so on. But before we start, let's define exactly what the hidden history, because this is the title of our talk tonight. What is hidden history, and how do you define it, and how, in fact, this hidden history squares away with the revisionist history?
Well, I think most people don't understand that the truth is under siege almost daily. So we see it's like an iceberg. We see the top, but below the waterline, we see very little. We know very little about what's happened in especially the 20th century. This is a construct. For example, we know when you mention Holocaust, when you mention the Gulag Archipelago, with 480 camps in the Gulag Archipelago in the Soviet Union, I asked one person if he can name one camp. Not one camp. And 18 million people were interned there. So we had a Nuremberg for the Nazi regime, but we had no Nuremberg, no closure for the communist regimes. And this is very well hidden today for obvious reasons, because especially in Croatia and other post-communist countries, communism, the crimes of the left have been rehabilitated. So this is one of the reasons. Balzac said this is not only our problem in Croatia, but it's a universal problem. I think Balzac, which you're familiar, the French writer, in the 19th century, he said that there's history, truth that is taught in schools, and the hidden history, which hides the causes, root causes of what we see today. And today, that's relevant today.
It's a very good point, Željko Glasnović, you've just made. It makes me think about the English scholar Edward Carr, with two R's at the end, who wrote a short booklet on what is history, with the title on what is history. And there is a good sentence in this book by the author, Edward Carr, which goes like this: before you study history, study a historian. How would you explain that? What is your take on modern historians or court historians for that?
Well, some of them are court jesters. Me being an amateur historian, I studied political science and modern history. But again, to know, when we talk about objective journalism, that in itself is an oxymoron. We know there's no objective journalism. I think the gonzo journalist, writer, Hunter S. Thompson said this. That's the total, it's lunacy, no objective journalism. Is, you know, when you pick up a book, you have to look at the sources and the footnotes. And you see pretty well that a lot of Western writers are under a certain pressure to write history that's accepted. But hidden history, I think east of the Rhine, very little is known by Western historians. My brother said this, because they know nothing east of the Rhine. So basically, they neither speak the language, they haven't been to the archives. So it's more or less they repeat, regurgitate propaganda, communist propaganda. It's historical truth, and that is not the truth.
Let's focus a little bit on the etymology and, of course, those semantic distortions of the word revisionism or historical revisionism. Just for our viewers' information, this word revisionism was practically non-existent here in Croatia about 6 or 7 years ago. However, in Europe and in the United States of America, this word has been quite popular in a negative sense. So what is wrong with this revisionist history? There are quite a few revisionist historians, we can mention them. Or is revisionism something which must be taken for granted? Because after all, when we study something, nowadays, let's say we study about the ancient Rome, we have a different revised history than, let's say, 700 or 800 years ago.
Well, it's part of that global brainwashing, that term. It's part of the. It's an attempt to erase collective memory, to replace it with a truth. Basically, not a truth, but it's an ideological form of brainwashing. For example, yesterday, 100 students from a high school came to the Croatian parliament. 100 of them. I believe the humanities was their forte. And I asked them if everyone has ever heard the word lustration. Lift your hand up. Of those 100 students, not one person lifted a hand in the air. That's frightening, actually. And then I asked myself, what type of teachers do they have? What kind of a system is this? As we said earlier, in an earlier broadcast, revisionism is the backbone of history. Research is revision.
So you give revisionism a positive meaning. There's nothing negative about it.
Exactly. There's nothing, but it's taken, it's almost...
it's taken its toll.
Yeah, it's a heresy almost. If you say revisionist, you're branded as a modern heretic.
Now, before we come to our quote-unquote revisionist historians in Croatia, there has been a witch hunt. Of course, our viewers know that in Croatia recently there was also foreign report in foreign media about some Croatian historians being revisionist in a negative sense. Let's first start with the West, and specifically I would like to target a little bit Canada and the United States of America, where revisionism is more or less allowed, but it doesn't have a free passage, so to speak, let alone France and Germany. We don't have to enumerate many of those names, but can you just briefly explain a little bit about this witch hunt of revisionists in the West?
Well, I think you have examples. For example, I was going to state David Irving, for example, who you're familiar with that case, and other cases where the truth is basically the truth is not important here, because we have in the world today, information is filtered. It's filtered. We see that also on Wikipedia, for example. That who writes Wikipedia and what is placed there. So we have to look behind the scenes as to who's the major construct of this I call it false history. Better call it one-eyed history. And we have, for example, you have techniques on the internet, for example, forum sliding, which influence people to think in one manner or another. You have so much disinformation that people cannot separate facts from fiction. But our problem in Croatia and in the West is that people reject empirical evidence.
Forensic evidence.
Forensic evidence. They still reject
pathological evidence, whatever we want.
So we're living in Croatia mostly a culture of denial, because it's that...
I mean, self-denial would be a better
self-denial,
word.
true enough. But from the top down, from the strategic levels of government to the man in the street. And the mantra that they always regurgitate is, we must forget, I've heard this from Americans also, forget the past, we must look into the future.
But we see, fortunately enough, that as far as the former Jewish suffering is concerned, or the suffering of the Jews and all the plight they went through, we have the history always coming back at us over and over and over again. We're, of course, not going to tackle that very much because we don't have time for that. But how do you actually explain this discrepancy that, for that matter, almost every day, on a daily basis, we hear about the fascist crimes or National Socialist crimes, or even Ustasha, be it real or surreal crimes, but we very seldom hear, almost frighteningly seldom, about communist crimes?
Well, we can go to your former alma mater, for example, in the United States, maybe Berkeley or other campuses, where historical truth is being massacred on a daily basis. The actual revisionists is the far left, the psychotic left, and its criminal chromosome. Criminal communist chromosome, as you said. For example, if you ask a man on the street in the United States if he's ever heard of Holodomor or the Kolyma camps.
Or for that matter, Bleiburg.
It's totally unknown. Because we talk about Bleiburg, the intensity of in history. What the communists did is they raised mass killings, and it advanced to an industrial scale. For example, we have, when you say Holodomor, all of Eastern Ukraine, it was the largest camp.
That's frightening that very many people, not just in Croatia, but
don't know. So
Canada, have no idea what Holodomor, what actually happened in Ukraine in 1933, 34, 35, just for our viewers' information. America established diplomatic relationship with the Soviet Union in 1933, 34, just about the time when this Holodomor was taking place all over Ukraine. So, I mean, let's just go further. I'm sure the name James Buck, Canadian famous historian, is familiar to you. Now, he's not I don't want to say revisionist historian, but he was basically in his books, which I'm familiar with. I think I even met him once. It was a long time ago in Canada. And he was, in fact, I don't know if he's still alive. I'm sorry, I got to apologize. But he wrote a book, Hidden Losses, or other losses, where he basically was the first Canadian historian, not a revisionist, I mean, not in a negative sense, but he actually tackled this topic about hidden history that you just mentioned a while. Can you just explain it a little bit? And he was actually frightened with the situation in Canada 10 years back.
Yeah, I read his book, Other Losses, and the other book, but he basically talks about this hidden history. The West is totally unaware of what happened to the Germans, the German minority. The German minority was exterminated from we said in the earlier podcast that the largest ethnic cleansing in history is the expulsion of German minority from Eastern Europe, from Croatia, from Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria, east of the Oder Rhine.
How many people approximately?
About 15 million.
Yeah, 15.
Of those, of course, the exact losses are after a million civilians were probably killed. The largest mass rapes in history were committed by, as we said also in the last podcast, 50 million German women were raped.
Yeah,
in not just in that part of where the Red Army was, but also
in the west part.
In the western part, in Belgrade, for example.
Oh, of course, we know that
they also killed. So
in Germany, occupied.
So why were they killing Serbian women and raping Serbian women in the Red Army? What excuse was this for this? Yeah. But when we go to the German, it's not well known what happened to the German minority here. We know about the Beneš Accords in Czechoslovakia.
Explain that a little bit, Beneš Accords, because unfortunately even many American students, let alone Croatian students, don't even realize who Beneš was and what those quote-unquote Beneš decrees were. They were drafted, I think, in 1944, just towards the end of the war. Explain them a little bit.
True. Well, the Czechs... Germany occupied Czechoslovakia, we know, prior to the actual start of the Second World War, the attack on Poland and the Molotov-Ribbentrop alliance, where the Russians came in from the east, the Germans from the west, and the West tries to hide this fact. But I always say that that's the only agreement that they've ever honored, is that pact with Stalin, or Stalin, the Hitler pact, the leftists. So they try to hide this like a snake tries to hide its legs. But I think 250,000 Germans were expelled from Czechoslovakia. Yeah. Many were tortured, killed, which is a tragedy because no crime ever deserves another crime. You cannot...
Let me rectify. 2.5 million ethnic Germans were expelled from Czechia and Slovakia 44, 45. Yeah. And approximately 250, these are official statistics, 250,000 were killed, or starved to death or whatever. Yeah, there was figures as high as 300,000. Yeah, which is it's a mark, not a mark. It's a mark of dishonor on the Czech nation. Then we have Yugoslavia, which was even more systematic. People haven't heard about this. For example, in Yugoslavia, over 500,000 ethnic Germans disappeared. I'm talking about percentage-wise, not the casualties. Yeah. 500,000 disappeared. At least 60,000 were murdered or died in camps of starvation, ill treatment. There were thousands of children. Can you mention some of those camps? Valpa was the biggest one. Yeah. In Serbia, you had camps, but these are civilian camps, not for soldiers. So we must separate military from civilian. Mm-hmm. I think as many prisoners of war German were killed as civilians. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about old men, women, children. Until extradition in 1948. Mm-hmm. And there was a euphemism. They said Tito called it human resettlement. Mm-hmm. Yes. So we saw what happened with human resettlement. And this is an unknown fact, even in Croatia, that 40,000 German children were taken from their parents. My mother was almost a victim of this. Not just German, Croatian children were taken from their parents for re-education in Belgrade by the communists. Yes. The old Bolshevik saying, give the child to the mother, being the state. Of these 40,000 children, we don't know what happened to them, where they ended up. But we know that about 30,000 German women were shipped to the Soviet Union as slave labor
the majority never returned. So these are tragedies that we don't know about. Then we have the highway robbery, the banditry, for example. Statistics. I think 21,000 farms were taken from the German, just in Croatia and the region of Vojvodina.
So I think let's explain to our viewers, in eastern Croatia, or in rather eastern Slavonia, and in what is today northern Serbia, in Vojvodina, there resided over half a million ethnic Germans or whatever, with Croatian citizenship or Yugoslav citizenship back to that, but they disappeared. After the Second World War in 47, 48, all of them, the traces disappeared. Now, Mr. Glasnović, General Glasnović, how do you explain this silence of the lambs or silence of the West? We haven't heard about this, even during the Cold War, so to speak, even during the so-called anti-communist Western Europe and the United States of America, even during the time of Kennedy and Dwight Eisenhower, and even later on, other than McCarthy, interestingly enough, he was the only one who brought this communist killing fields. But we never heard about this when we don't hear about this.
Well, Robert Conquest in the 70s wrote a book called Harvest of Sorrow.
Harvest of Sorrow, Robert Conquest.
And these leftists, which were idiotized by the East, by communist propaganda, they shot him down in flames. But to be more explicit, when all these, after Stalin's death and Khrushchev's illumination of those crimes, Khrushchev was also a criminal. He was one of the major architects of the genocide against Ukraine. We talk about genocide, we don't mention class genocide, aristicide. Mm-hmm. But Khrushchev was one of the gang leaders for the killing squads in Ukraine with Kaganovich, Lazar Kaganovich, who died in bed at the age of 90. And after this came to the fore in the West, at least it was being talked about, Conquest said, "I told you so, you fucking idiots."
Yeah, good point. General Glasnović, I'll be a little bit provocative. You haven't answered my question. How come that even nowadays we see almost no movies about communist killing fields? We see no books, actually. Once in a while, yes, but it's very tacit, very sort of a hidden history. And on the other hand, almost daily we hear about the Holocaust, we hear about Anna Frank, we even know what the toothpaste and the toothbrush she used, whatever, even little details. But we never ever hear about, let alone, the mass killings of Croats in northern Slovenia and in southern Austria and later on in the Balkans. So how do you explain this silence as far as Western scholars are concerned?
There are cliques in the West. There are cliques in the West that are forcing us, to some extent they've succeeded, that we look at the world through their eyes, which is the wrong perception. This hidden history part of it is engineered by the Hollywood, the Hollywood idiot machinery, because people are unaware of this. And this is done for a reason, because the Germans, for example, must always be victims. Mm-hmm. The perpetrators, never the victims. How many are aware that 1 million German civilians died of starvation during the naval blockade in the First World War? This is unknown.
This is what James Buck is talking about in his book, Other Losses. Yeah. But and now viewers probably don't even realize that hundreds of thousands, I don't know if it's 700,000 or 1 million German POWs. In fact, they were even denied the status of POW. They were enemy combatants, so they were treated like pigs anyway. So 1 million approximately died in those fields out of starvation.
See, there are some headway being made.
Pardon?
There's some headway being made. For example, the Ukrainian community in Canada has a bus. The bus tours from province to province.
Yeah, explain that to our viewers.
Yeah, they try to. They're very well organized, and they have a strategic plan, and they want to inform the world, not just Canada, about this hidden genocide. Yeah,
Ukrainian Canadians are very strong. They're quite wealthy. Yeah. And please tell us a little bit about their memorial centers, and can Croatia learn something?
As a parliament member, I remember going to the HDZ, one of these advisors, when I was before I started my political.
You mean the Croatian party, right?
Yeah, before I started my political career, and I said to one of the advisors, who gets all his information from Wikipedia, I said, "Listen, there's a monument being built in Canada. You can find it on the internet. It's called tributeliberty.com, where all the countries that suffered under communism, the Baltics, Poland, Ukraine, and so on, are giving money to build this monument. For $1,000, you can have your name, individual name, or the name of a group inscribed on the monument. So I said, what are our people doing are they going to contribute to the monument and pay homage to the thousands of Croatian victims of this regime? He looked at me again, as my brother says, like a monkey looking at a wristwatch. Yeah.
Well,
I went to Canada eventually, and no thanks to the Croatian government. They contributed later, ad hoc, but initially, thanks to the I think the Croatian Heritage Association and parishes Croatian parishes from Eastern Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. These Croatians they gathered $40,000, and the check was delivered in a Croatian church to the president of this organization, tributetoliberty.com, who's, by the way, she was born in the Baltics. This woman. So we saved face. But still, there's very little interest. Yeah. But the problem in Croatia is this: you said that many Croatians still carry that criminal chromosome. Yeah,
and especially the older cadres, the former communist cadres.
Yeah, true. They don't. What they do is, if you say what we say, this is the old communist tactic. They won't attack. They'll attack you as an individual. They won't attack the argument, but you as an individual. So we still haven't. There's no catharsis here yet, no closure. Because we have thousands of mass graves from Slovenian border to the Bulgarian border.
I mean, would you agree with me? I mean, this is my statement. I call Croatia, for that matter, ex-communist Yugoslavia, the topography of death, or how can I say, the mass killing fields. And I don't know, it sounds a little bit morbid, but I guess probably our tourist organizations or whatever, tourist bureaus all over the world, they should have at each border passage, they should probably put those big billboards, "Welcome to the land of death," because indeed, explain that from up north, from Slovenia all the way down to Macedonia, this country is literally
you have
replete with crime.
Yeah, true. You have two institutions in Slovenia that have done neutral research, Ferenc, and the other one is attached to the University of Ljubljana. And they have a victims list of 17,500 of their people that were killed, mostly Slovenian White Guards. And they also published a book, Slovenia in 1945. So they've come to a certain extent, at least this has come to light. Because what's happening here, not just here, but over Europe, that the victims of communism are dying a second death, the death of memory-side.
Nobody pays attention to that.
No,
I guess we got nothing to hide. Just recently, a very prominent, your colleague, by the way, parliament representative, Mr. Stasic, who was a former communist, of course, he made some very awful remarks about the Croatian victims in 1945. Some really, I would almost say, the criminal remarks. They said that more should have been killed. Can you imagine?
True, yeah, he said exactly this.
I can quote him.
He said, we haven't finished the job in 1945.
Yeah.
That was exactly
Stasic,
so
right?
This is something that is mind-boggling. In any other country that believes in the rule of law, that has any sense of what victimology is, would have jailed him for 10 years for that comment. But this is that, as I say again, that homo sovieticus, homo jugoslavenicus, because these people's minds, they've been marinated in an ideology. They were basically marinated in a sect, in the most murderous doctrine in human history. We see this when a person like Vesna Teršelić, all our NGOs basically.
Say again,
Vesna Teršelić.
Vesna Teršelić, explain who she is.
She's a former nobody knows her. They're very well, very well adapted at hiding their identity.
Oh yeah,
they burnt their party cards, and now overnight.
They become full-blown liberals.
So Vesna Teršelić, for example, and two feminists were holding a vigil in the upper town for 3 witches that were burnt, I believe, in the 17th century.
And where were those vigils held?
On the upper town, the oldest part.
When was it?
This was a few years ago. But then again, the stunning hypocrisy of that performance. What about these 50 million German women that were raped? What about when you talk about Africa, the Rainbow Nation, Mandela and the legacy now of what we see in South Africa, where a child gets raped every 6 minutes, where male boys from 11 to 15, the majority think that rape is not a crime. Because, for example, if you rape a virgin, it's supposed to cure HIV, AIDS. So,
we don't hear this
no one talks about these 200 million women that are circumcised. In Africa, the other countries. No one talks about sati, women bride burning in India, and sexual abuse. What's frightening is that this culture of Marxism is seeped into every pore of society. We have, for example, Bill 89 in Ontario, Canada.
What is that? Bill 89?
Bill 89, which talks about gender, gender identity. This is basically a direct intrusion into the family as far as sexual orientation is concerned. I think that one bishop said this. He said the devil will start to walk the earth when the destruction of the family begins. The family as a unit is totally now in
We'll come to the topic of family, but I just want to say a few more words about this hidden history. Are there any ways of actually rectifying this, how can I say, teaching of history classes in not just here in Croatia, but also in the West? Because I went through it back when I was a graduate student in California at the UC system. Very few Americans, even top-notch scholars, knew about what happened in ex-communist Yugoslavia in 46, 47, 48. I mean, when I mentioned the word Bleiburg, I mean, they would have a hard time even stuttering and pronouncing it. Now, let's be a little bit more, I don't want to say positive, but are there any ways, are there any venues that we can organize, or for that matter, set up in order to demystify this good old anti-fascist? Now they don't want to call themselves communists, they call themselves anti-fascists because it sounds more euphemistic, it sounds more swallowable. I presume you would agree with that, right?
True. Well, this is a total failure of the Croatian educational system, the cadres within that system. There are minor advances. For example, recently in Ontario, there was a organization called Matselj.
Matselj, yes, say a few words.
Matselj is
what is Matselj?
It's a range of like a mountain range between Slovenia and Croatia.
So it's a location where
half and half. And they found 130 mass graves, or at least 13,000 people were killed.
They found them after recently. After the fall.
Yeah, this was taboo. This was a taboo theme until recently, because until the 1990s, you could not talk about this because you faced a jail sentence, or even worse, a bullet to the back of the head.
A bullet in the back of the head.
So in 1991, they exhumed from 13 pits, death pits, about 1,100, 1,200 remains. They stacked them in plastic bags, and they were sitting on the attic of one of the hospitals in Zagreb here.
I saw it with my eyes.
True, and this was never...
Isn't that a shame? Can you imagine this had happened with the victims of fascism? And I mean, the whole world, the whole Hollywood, the whole news would have screamed and hollered about that.
Well, the intensity of the killing. This is one thing. It's a historical, I think. As I said, the communists they were the first to raise advanced killing. They raised it to an industrial scale because you had transport, you had automatic weapons, you had death squads that could be fed, moved from point to point. You had a military organization, mobility. I mean, it was not uncommon for some. They killed people in shifts. For some individuals to kill, say, 700-800 people in one shift. And some, later, they called it partisan disease. They got, obviously, post-traumatic stress. People weren't just shot to the back of the head. They were killed with mallets, axes, and so on. And so what happened, instead of a catharsis in 1991, the HDZ...
You mean the Croatian so-called right-wing...
So-called right-wing, actually, the right wing of the UDB. Because as soon as Tudjman came to power, he installed all the former
communists. You know, we got to say
communists
that
and secret police cadres.
Yes.
And then what happened again? Instead of debriefing people that were still alive, that witnessed these tragedies, they appointed mayors and political leaders that were part of that system in the same towns.
Yes, I remember that as a former
you had, for example, a guy called Fizir. They appointed him as town mayor in Krapina, and he was one of the executioners in Matselj. So people froze to death. Again, they call it the UDBA fear, secret police fear. they clammed up. And what's happened over the decades since Croatian War of Independence, audiovisual material has disappeared. Reports have disappeared. So they're basically hidden their tracks.
They hide.
And all these they're all, as I said before, they're all dying in their beds, like Lazar Kaganović, Josip Bojkovac. Manolić is still here, one of the biggest exponents of communism here. Budimir Lončar, his unit was throwing people into the sea with rocks around it.
He just got decorated with some prize just a couple of days ago. Can you imagine? I just don't understand what's going on.
You got the highest recognition of the city of Zagreb for services. He was decorated by the mayor, but his unit was they called it the Underwater Battalion.
Underwater Battalion. General Glasnović, we forgot what happened to ethnic Hungarians in ex-communist Yugoslavia. In fact, in the first days of ex-communist Yugoslavia. We do have friends in the States, in the UK, and of course Hungary. Orban is our big friend, and we certainly appreciate their culture, regardless of some problems we had back in the Middle Ages, whatever. But let's see what happened to Hungarian quote-unquote minority in Vojvodina and Yugoslavia. Just briefly, please.
Well, from my knowledge, in Bačka, they were totally exterminated.
Oh, how many people approximately?
There are estimates up to 20 between. Historians usually take the lowest estimate and the highest estimate. And somewhere in between is the.
So I guess probably.
So, but they say it could be up as high as 40,000. So and as many as 10. So somewhere there is they were exterminated. They suffered the same fate as the ethnic Germans. Yeah. And the Croatians suffered. Petar Varadin, it was one of the.
Petar Varadin.
Ban Jelačić. His statue is in the center of Zagreb. He was. It was the most Croatian town. I think over 80% Croatians. Now I think you have.
Varadin, yes.
But you have 70,000 Croatians, Croatian descent, and only 20,000 identify themselves as Croatians. This is part of that social engineering by the Serbian government.
We'll continue with that, and we'll come to this recent events. But just before we go on, I would just like to advertise a little bit my book, Postmortem Report. Folks, if you ever have a chance to order the book, or if you don't want to read it, just look at the bibliography and my footnotes. It contains quite a few of essays. Among others, it contains an essay on the destruction of ethnic Germans in Tito's Yugoslavia, which Željko was talking about a while ago. I have another book, and we'll just make a short digression and a little promo, if you don't mind. Ladies and gentlemen, folks, please make donations to Marko and to this show, and make donations right to us. And if you have any questions, if you have any criticism or comment, feel free to drop me a line, or drop a line to Željko Glasnović. He has a nice website. He has a nice Facebook as well. And Željko, why don't you announce a little bit this upcoming event real briefly, this coming Friday on the 8th of February, 7 p.m. at the prestigious Matica Hrvatska, which is sort of we can't translate that into English.
A heritage, maybe.
Heritage foundation, a cultural foundation, can sort of met a political foundation. Yeah. My book, which was originally published in English, but 10 years back, it's now exists in its good English translation, so I'd be very happy, folks, if you could come over and listen to Željko Glasnović, and you can say a few words about this event, Željko Glasnović.
Well, true, Tom. This coming
Friday, right? Friday the 8th of February the 8th.
Yeah. Well, Tom, this is very important, right? Because Professor Sunić, we've known each other for a long time, and I think in Croatia, he's a voice crying in the wilderness. But it's coming around because the professor understands that we can win out every other battle, but if we lose the cultural battle,
that's the most important.
That's the most important battle.
So on a purely technical, thanks for your comments and for your laudatory remarks. But on a purely technical level, I've also invited some hosts, some folks, some of your volunteers, even some foreign volunteers who reside in Zagreb, who are married here, good friends of ours. And of course, I've also invited some academics, and I'd be happy if you could invite our viewers.
Sure enough, let them show up, because this is not only a collective but an individual battle. We must the truth must be shared, because I think that it's our responsibility to win that cultural battle. And because in the book itself, Homo Americanus, I've read other of
you read the English version, right?
True, and there are topics here that are totally under researched, underreported here.
Okay.
So the advantage that the professor has is he sees both sides of the
yes. Your advantage as well.
He's lived in the United States. He's lived here, and The psychological aspect, Homo Americanus, Homo Sovieticus, we see that they're starting to overlap.
Absolutely.
That cultural field is narrowing, and we see that more and more the world today is basically the common man's mind is basically on a single track, a narrow track. Is being narrowed more and more every day. And I think the forum for debate is getting narrower and narrower.
Yes, but that's exactly what we have to fight against.
Exactly.
Always we got to abide by the law, folks, but we raise, as Mr. Glasnović said, we are the sort of a rare voices in the desert, but we have to fight against this desert outlook anyway. So anyway, Mr. Glasnović, thank you for this remarks about the book. Well, let's continue about the topic itself, because regardless of my book, the book deals specifically with post-modernity, and you'll have a short 15 minutes talk about this Hollywood inspired America that many East Europeans and many Croatians still uphold. They think that America is sort of a la-la land. We'll talk about some other time, and I'll be very pleased to have you as a guest, well, especially after this event is over. But let's just backpedal a little bit. Let's go back to this hidden history. And my direct question, because after all, you are high politicians, you know those people very well, your parliamentary representatives, regardless whether you love them or hate them. How does the Minister of Culture, Mrs. Divjak, or Divjak, whatever, how does she react? What is her stance on this hidden history? What is her stance on Bleiburg, for instance, on the mass killing fields where, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Croats, literally were shrugged with eternity, just disappeared overnight?
Well, she's part of that machine.
Which machine, please?
Well, we have to understand that, I said before, the whole bureaucratic apparatus, the educational apparatus, all these people have pedigrees in the former Yugoslavia. And I think up to, as you know, Professor, being a psychologist also, a psychiatrist, I think that you know that up to a certain age that you're formed as a person and your intellectual capacities come to the fore. The Peter Principle, you rise to the I would say the extent of your ability or disability, and also your mind is your mental framework is formed by the time you're 17, 18. Say after that, it's difficult to put new ideas into your head. We're basically still victims of the past, and they identify with this past because they basically remained on the other side of the Berlin Wall. So what they're doing, that's why I call Croatia Croslavia, not Croatia, because all those cadres received their education in the former Yugoslavia. And they're just regurgitating what they've heard before. And as soon as someone comes here from the outside, they very quickly adapt to this
paleo-communist mores. What strikes me, what I truly find frightening, let's just face it. On the one hand, we hear daily in the foreign news outlets, in fake news or whatever you want to call it, New York Times, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, what have you, Le Monde, you hear critical comments and remarks that Croatia is a revisionist country, replete with nationalist and right-wing ustashas and what have you. And on the other hand, you yourself, better than anybody else, what we witness on the daily basis is just the persistence and the prevalence of former communist cadres. So basically, we are not talking about the Ustasha or right-wing Croatia. We are talking about the neo-communist, on the empirical level, neo-communist government, which is fully staffed with former communist cadres. And I have problems with my friends in America and France telling them, no, this is not a right-wing country. This is a full-fledged neo-communist country. Explain that, please.
Well, exactly. I mean, as I said, all the old cadres are here. Basically, they're not. They haven't changed their. They say the wolf changes its fur, but never its nature. And this is a dilemma. The problem is that they've taken over the cultural field. You have them in newspapers. Look at for example, Croatian cinema. Vinko Brešan.
Explain them.
Probably Vinko Brešan. The best. The film now is in the theaters. The name of to translate the title of the film. What kind of country is this? Yeah. So destructive criticism of a country they never wanted. First, he was probably Yugoslav. Rajko Grlić, Yugoslav. All these people.
Frljić as well, this guy.
Frljić as well. He doesn't know what he is, but he's also Yugoslav pedigree.
Well, they're not the few.
Let's
say, a whole bunch of them.
The torchbearers of Croatian culture outside the country, Dubravka Ugrišić, Slavenka Drakulić, all former communist cadres that fled abroad. What they fled from, I don't know. They probably fled from themselves. Look at our daily papers. Miljenko Jergović, just to give one example. The devil is very silver-tongued, very smooth. Jergović, he's very fluent. He writes in English also. He's picked up several awards abroad. But, for example, in the last week, he writes an article on the translation into Croatian of the Bible. He has 3 pages in a daily newspaper, probably the most read paper, Jutarnji List. And after 3 pages, he totally switches the topic from the literary field and says this: not one Croatian translation of the Bible is worth the lives of thousands of Serbs and Jews killed by the Ustaše in the Second World War.
Is that what he said?
So this is what we see, those chameleons. They're always in this, despite their veneer of civility, and behind that veneer is a total loss of identity, a total loss of any type of morals. Well, let's face it, partisans. We talk about the German. I started mentioning what was taken from the ethnic Germans. There were 72,000 homes were taken from them, 121,000 hectares of land, 150,000 heads of cattle. I think we have 59,000 businesses and small shops, 200,000 farm machines and tools. So we see that these people were not just morally bankrupt, they were also thieves and bandits.
Thieves and their progeny, this is what you are suggesting, their progeny is well alive and kicking, right?
True enough.
Now you have mentioned a couple of names, and please do explain our viewers, our listeners, that this cultural field is being firmly held by the progeny of former communist cutthroats. Let's call them cutthroats.
Exactly, Because see, what we see from them is false empathy. They have no empathy for Jewish victims. Or any victims for that fact.
They're just pretending to be Philo-Semites. I know their psychology very well. Tomorrow they will turn into full-fledged anti-Semites, I can tell you.
True.
The very same people, because now they want to cater to those Philo-Semitic feelings and so on. True. We'll talk about this, but to explain a little bit that mindset of Jergović, of Stasić, of so-called big shots, who protects them?
Well, they're protected from the strategic level. You mentioned the Ministry of Culture. Who funds these people? I will give you an example. The Yugoslav paper, Novosti, it's actually Serbian, but they get 500,000 kuna, I believe, yearly for their services.
From the Croatian budget, right?
Croatian budget.
Please, yes.
What they do is it's a total, flag burnings, total destructive criticism, 500,000. We have a magazine, which is the magazine of Croatian political prisoners, called Hrvatski zatvorenik.
Which doesn't get a dime.
No, they get. I think they were annually 10,000 when you compare this. And these people, some of them were abused in jail. Some spent 10 years, 5 years in jail for telling a joke. So it shows you that this government has no clear political or moral goals. Recently, you made a comment about this distortion of history. For example, our president, Mrs. Grabar-Kitarović, instead of criticizing the former regime, she criticizes Austria-Hungary. But just a moment, please. Austria-Hungary, our books, the land records are from the time of Austria-Hungary. All the railroads from the time of Austria-Hungary. Most of the roads, Austria-Hungary. The lighthouses. Naval academies, not just here but Bosnia. We had 500 kilometers of private railroads, telegraph lines. They basically laid the foundations for a modern society. And instead of fragging those thieves, bandits, they killed over 500,000 people after 1945. They totally destroyed the country's economy, destroyed the village. They forced 1 million Croats to emigrate, just the economic immigrants. But worst of all, they destroyed. It's a soul-destroying doctrine that I call it Bolshevik Satanism.
So basically,
she basically criticizes Austria-Hungary, but not a word about this criminal gang that's still in power here.
Well, so basically, are you suggesting, I don't know if you agree with that or not, this is a rhetorical question, are you suggesting that she is basically a perpetrator of this hidden history?
Well, I would say that, this is a moral crime. I don't think she's, I think maybe that she's, I don't think, can she be unaware of what she said? I don't think so.
Or is she just a puppet that can be inflated and just like a Duracell cells, you know, it's going and going and going. You know those Duracell's batteries.
Sure, for sure. Like,
so it reminds me. I saw this this commercial on.
Well, this is that. I think you mentioned that. I believe Vilfredo Pareto.
Vilfredo Pareto.
What's happening to the world? We can't generalize, of course, but I think to Germany to a certain extent, to some extent, Germany, not all of Germany. Other countries behind the iron, former countries. When Pareto said, he said, Croatia, of course, is if a man willfully becomes a sheep, he'll always find the wolf to eat him.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are today.
I guess in a way, if I can conclude, we still have a couple of minutes left, General Glasnović, but I guess we were all a little bit naive, and especially our expatriates, you know, Croats, you know, and not just that, but also foreign volunteers who came with you and with me back in 93, even earlier than that. We also actually thought that this country was going to stand up and become a functional country. We're not vindictive. We're not trying to see, we're not looking for vengeance or anything. But look what we have now. It's a mishmash. I will say that, I don't know if you would agree with that this is just a joke. What the country looks like is just a joke, a very tragic joke.
Well, I think
a fraud, if I could put it.
A symbol of that is what we mentioned last time, that Marko Jurič was taken for questioning in front of us, almost a kangaroo court.
Kangaroo.
So this is frightening, that we're losing our. Well, it's a fight. I won't despair here. It's an ongoing battle, not just for us, but globally. Just recently, we've seen in the news. This is the top thing in the news is that the INF, the United States, have left that nuclear agreement with the Soviet Union. So when you hear, forget the. I think that agreement was signed in 1987. Ronald Reagan and his partner in the Soviet Union was Gorbachev, I believe.
Yes, they said Gorbachev and then Reagan.
So they say forget the past. So the past is coming back very quickly. And again, to tie in this hidden history we have, for example, the NPF, the Treaty for Nuclear Proliferation, which 191 countries signed, but 4 countries did not.
Which?
Well, Sudan. North Korea, Pakistan, India, and of course Israel, which has 60 nukes in the Negev desert.
They have 200 heads, you know, I presume.
Well, at least 60. We don't know the exact.
So how do you explain those double standards? I mean, here's
we have one standard for Iran, another for Israel, and I think we mentioned the Rosenbergs, did we not?
Explain that a little bit, you know, because most folks don't even younger guys don't know about Rosenberg.
They basically were traitors. They were grand traitors. They sold.
You mean the family Rosenberg who actually sold the files to Stalin?
Nuclear secrets to Stalin.
Stalin in the early 50s.
Yeah, when Europe was in the grip of a Stalinist winter for not just our Yugoslavia, but back to communism, unknown history, that 300,000 people died from communism in Romania.
Yes.
The biggest labor camp, forced labor camp in Europe was in Romania, not the Soviet Union. 300,000 dead. Are these people? I ask myself, what are these people? Are they sacks of potatoes? See, the thing is, we have to individualize these crimes. These are not just the murders of millions. Stalin, what did Stalin say? He said the death of one man, I believe he said this, is a tragedy. 1 million is a statistic.
Statistics.
So this is a murder of millions by one. Who knows? Who remembers these people? Somewhere in the depths of the Siberian Gulag, an individual scratched, they found it on the wall. He said, "Do not forget us." Have we forgotten?
We do have, however, in Croatia, some valiant historians and some people of character. We went with some of them recently to Australia. We met some important people, also Australians, and I can single out that there are quite a few of them. Also, Igor Vukic, he's a solid guy. He's doing good research, and I don't know if you agree with that statement. There are also some other guys. Pečarić is also doing good work, and I would disagree with this quote-unquote label of revisionism. They're just stating the fact. And
the truth is.
And they're doing a good job in also the Slovenian.
The truth is criminalized.
Right. I know for sure there are quite a few of scholars here who know this game, but for a variety of reasons, probably because of their pension funds, or because they're part of the regime, of the system, like Klasić, or what is this other guy, Marko and all the guys. Well, I myself, on a psychological level, let's leave aside, politics and their worldviews. I think that they know pretty much the game, but, they just repeat this mantra because it's popular. Antifa is today very popular. We can talk about Antifa. So let's just conclude a little bit about this distorted mindset of Antifa. We have a couple of minutes left, General Glasnović.
Well, they say the best deceivers are the ones that have deceived themselves.
Uh-huh.
I think they themselves don't believe what they're saying, the majority of them. But you have that segment, what percentage that is of these people that are totally delusional and that are victims of that Bolshevik Satanism. We have Occam's razor, for example, a postulate, Occam's razor, that says that says that if you study something, I think a monk constructed that postulate in the 13th century. He said that most commonly, the simplest answer, the right answer to the question is the simplest one. See, they deny all this empirical evidence. They're constantly living in a state of denial.
So they're actually historical deniers. We are not deniers.
Yeah, they actually suffer from anal cranial inversion.
You explained that a little bit. Anal
cranial inversion. Their head is up their ass.
Yeah, good point. Exactly. Unfortunately, they're not the only one. Yes, I mean we have this problem in higher education. So why don't you wrap up this? Can something be done? Listen, after all,
sure. We just look to the former Soviet Union. We had an NGO there called Memorial. I think to date they've come to 2 million of Stalin's victims by name. I think their database was taken away a while ago, but they've continued to carry on with this. What is in the archives, for example? We have we talked about illustration last time. The 3 basic pillars. The first pillar, opening. The people know what happened. This is part of illustration.
So you're coming back to archives.
To archives. The third is cadres.
Cadres. Okay.
As you know, you can go to Czechoslovakia. You can look at 300,000 archives open.
All right. So we'll just finish with that. So the answer lies. This is a clear-cut answer in the opening of archives. Would you agree with that or not?
True enough. True enough. And what should have been done a long time ago was done. But how much of it is destroyed, I don't know. It's audiovisual statements. I'll give you an example. My uncle was a prisoner of war in Tesno, and they kept him alive after the mass killings. Tesno was a former POW, it was a former airplane factory, but which after the war became
after the Second World War.
Second War in May of 1945 they killed up to 18 to 20,000 people. They've done forensic evidence and sondage, testing of the ground. Sure. There's an anti-tank ditch there up to 2 kilometers in length, which is full of bodies. Mostly Croatian soldiers, but also civilians. And he was there, and they kept the killing went on for weeks. And they kept him alive to separate him and several others, maybe a platoon, to separate the clothes of the dead because they stripped them naked. This is the symbol of communism. Is the figure 8 wire which people will bond with before being shot. This will be the symbol of communism, not so much the 5-pointed star.
We should talk about those communist killing fields in our next show. So General Glasnović, frightening killing fields, and unfortunately many of our folks, not just the foreign folks, but our folks have no idea what actually happened here in communist Yugoslavia. And I would like to thank you for being with us tonight. And I wish all the best to our viewers. Thank you very much for your attention.